A big heartfelt welcome to everyone that has decided to join us on this lunchtime session, or of course it could be breakfast or dinner, depending on where you're dialing in from outside of Europe. So it's really wonderful that people want to take part in this today, and I can see more people coming in now, which is absolutely fantastic. I'm just going to keep admitting people as we go through. We are here today to understand how to engage our key stakeholders with the diversity, equity, inclusion and belonging business case, or DEIB, you'll see on the screen, and why investing in progressing this work is really essential to all aspects of the business. Now, we're going to get started in just a sec, but please don't worry if a colleague of yours is running a little bit late or someone has missed the start of this. We are recording it, so we will send it to you after the session as well. So before we get started, I'm just going to give you a little bit of insight into who I am and also the business. So I'm Zoe Holland. I am a learning expert and have been working in the field of learning and organizational development for about 17 years now, and I've had the pleasure of working with lots of fantastic organizations throughout a variety of industries like hospitality, retail, engineering, asset management, the creative industry and marketing, just to name a few. Now, I'm trained and experienced in neuro-linguistic programming, social psychology, and executive coaching, which I've used over the last 7 years to really bring the DEIB learning into the work that we do. Now, I'm extremely passionate about creating a more fair and balanced society, and it's really core to my values. And I also believe that the business world can and already is having a massive impact, and that we can have more of a part to play. And this is a really good conversation to be had. Now, what that did is it led me to set up the business a few years ago, which is Zing Learning. And Zing is a creative and energetic tailored learning and organization that coaches as well and inspires and empowers people to create inclusive working environments. So it's a space where diversity can thrive and organizations are able to have very ethical and sustainable business performance that really stands the test of time. We work with some incredibly talented facilitators and content developers, and this really empowers our clients to approach what can feel a little bit overwhelming and a bit of a culture change aspect. Even the most cynical of stakeholders, we can really get them on board and really nurture their learning. We're hugely passionate about that at Zing, and sharing knowledge and information and creating credible diversity, equity, inclusion and belonging people is also a fantastic thing that we do. So that's why we're here today, to share some of that knowledge with you. It's a little bit about me, a little bit about the business. So let's get stuck in to our learning today. So diversity, equity, inclusion or belonging, which is DEIB, you're going to see that a lot today, is not just about the moral and ethical business kind of practice. It's 100% a strategic competitive advantage. But I guess you already knew that because you're here, and you wouldn't be here otherwise. I also imagine that you're here because you're looking to start a conversation with your board or your exec or your senior leadership team around this important topic. Now, I think it's really, really important to be able to back up some conversations that we're having around this important topic with really great statistics and research and really good ways to think about all of that stuff. So I'm going to give you some really great ideas from that today. And these are the things that we're going to be having a bit of a look at. Now, it shouldn't be too much of a surprise because you signed up and these were the reasons that you signed up, but we're going to have a look around some of those core areas of D, E, I, and B, and also how to justify the business benefits, because the chances are you're asking for investment or you're asking for resource or time to do this work in your organization. I'm going to give you some really great ways to make sure you're prepared to have the conversation, but also share some key strategic questions to really spark engagement as well. So let's start then by defining some of the key areas of this area. Now, I think sometimes even getting our head around the ever-evolving acronyms within this world can be a really great place to start, because it can sometimes feel a bit overwhelming. It really helps when we feel confident when we're talking about these, when we can articulate the importance of the different areas, but also knowing how to differentiate them when we're talking about what we're going to be investing in. Now, during our sessions with clients, we find that helping people to understand not only the meaning behind these definitions, also the opposing factors of each area of these work really helps to embed the idea that it's not just a few words on a website or some diverse looking people in photographs. This is about the human factor. So let's start by putting the human into the buzzwords. So the first one then is equality. It's probably something you've heard quite a few times. So equality is all about ensuring that every individual has an opportunity to make the most of their lives and their talents. It's also the benefit that no one should have poorer life chances or life choices because of where they're born, where they come from, what they believe, how they identify, or any other differentiating factor. Now, equality takes it one step further and recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the exact resources and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome. Now, in our sessions, we use lots of different examples, but one of them, when we're trying to help people understand equity, is to think about the concept of two students, one of which has dyslexia, the other person doesn't. Now, both students need to complete an assignment as part of their grade. And as one of the students does not have dyslexia, this naturally gives them an unfair advantage of scoring higher. So to create equity, all we need to do is just level the playing field, and something as simple as more time for the person that has dyslexia to complete the assessment or the assignment, or even software that you can buy that can really help people with dyslexia. So it's not giving anyone more advantage over anyone else. It's just slowly leveling out that playing field there. So that's what we mean when we say equity. Now, diversity, I'm sure you're all very familiar with. This is how we really start to think about each individual as unique and start to recognize, but also celebrate the individual differences and really embrace them in the work that we're doing. Obviously, this can be around lots of different dimensions like race and gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, lots and lots of kind of factors that you're probably familiar with. Inclusion, of course, is the act of including someone in something like a school, a club, a work, or a community. And also it's making someone feel like they're part of something bigger. So, of course, when we're talking about the organizational context, we're talking about the workplace. Belonging takes it a little bit further and gives a feeling of security and support when there's a real sense of acceptance and inclusion and identity for a member of a certain group. So this is when an individual can really start to bring their full selves to work, and it means that they're more likely then to do their best work. Justice is a concept of ethics and, of course, law. Now, it's all about a fair and equal balance for everyone, and that's what we mean with justice. The same concept goes with fair, so it implies that treating of all sides alike and justly and equitably is really, really important. And finally, this is an interesting one because this is one that you probably hear more often now, but the concept of representation. So this is the state of being represented. So I know that there's somebody from the engineering field on the call today, so welcome. If you think about engineering as an industry, it has a very high level of men, and therefore men are very well represented in the engineering industry. So it just gives you a bit of context there. Then we look at the opposites, and what you'll start to notice here is a little bit of a pattern with the IN for lots of different aspects, or we sometimes use UN. So inequality is, of course, the opposite of equality. So we're not necessarily giving everybody the same equal opportunities. Inequity is the opposite. So we're not giving people different things to bring them up to the same level. Homogeneous is the opposite of diversity, and therefore it means the same as. It might be that we're all from the same university, or we all went to university. It might be that we all look the same, or think the same, or act the same. Lots of different ways in which homogeneous can be. Then we've got exclusion is the opposite of inclusion. So people don't feel like they're included. Estrangement is the opposite to belonging. Now, there's lots of different words you can use here, but this one felt the furthest away from belonging. And sometimes understanding when we really don't feel safe and secure and supported, we don't feel like we belong in those situations. Injustice and unfair are the opposite of those two. But one I want to highlight in a bit more detail is underrepresented. Now, there's another word that is overrepresented, which you might start to notice in social media and different conversations as well. So people are actually now moving a little bit away from underrepresented. The idea of this is that it refers to groups within society that are disproportionately represented. So if you're in the working world and you work for an organization where most of the employees are men, actually, that means that women are underrepresented because, especially in the UK, 51% of the population is women. So it gives you a kind of idea of what we mean. You could also think about it in an organizational level. So you could have 35% of your population that are working with you are from ethnic minority backgrounds, but actually only 1% of your senior leadership team is from an ethnic minority background. So it just shows you that people are not progressing through the organization and therefore they're not underrepresented at the top. Now, of course, overrepresentation looks at it and flips the view and says, where have we got too many of the same people and where are we overrepresented in that way? So it's a slightly different way of thinking about it. So now that we've got kind of some of the language down, which I think is really helpful for you to know where you want to invest and where you want to start to think about asking your business for investment, these are some really great ways to really back up your argument, and being able to really confidently link the business benefits of investing in any inclusion work is probably the first step to really starting to create curiosity with your leadership team and the strategic decision makers. Now, whilst morality is at the forefront of these types of organizational initiatives, and so it should be, clarity on the bottom line business impact of investing in the work is really essential to get the buy-in and really essential to get the support of those key organizational decision makers. So the data is really helpful as it will tell the story of why inclusion work is not just a kind of nice to have. The human aspect really adds depth to the data and it will make it more real for your senior stakeholders. So adding the two together is really, really important. There's also an aspect that, especially when you become more senior in an organization, what naturally happens is you lose touch a little bit with the rest of the organization and how they feel. So this will reconnect them and really help them to see it in that point of view. So we need to look at both the kind of qualitative data and also the quantitative data. So here's some that you can put in your armor that are going to help you to really drive home. So research has established connections between diversity and financial performance increasing. So you've got all of the fantastic acronyms. You've got return on investment, return on equity, and all of the other acronyms that define profitability, growth rates, and of course, stock investments as well. So this is actually a 41% increase on return on equity when a higher proportion of women are in those executive spaces as well. So that's a huge, huge increase. You can see some more data there as well. But there's also a 38% revenue on innovative products and services. And of course, the one in the middle there is all about ethnic and racial diversity. And actually, when you have that in your top spaces, it really increases financial returns and 35% above the average for your industry. So there's some pretty good numbers there that I think are going to help your board to understand this in a bit more detail. But on top of that, in the UK, for every 10% increase in gender diversity at the senior leadership or exec level, earnings before interest and taxes, so your EBIT, rose by 3.5%. So let's remind ourselves, we're only increasing by 10% gender diversity, and already you're starting to see the benefits there. Also, companies with gender diverse boards have fewer instances of controversial business practices such as fraud or corruption or bribery, all of those sorts of things. So not only does it support greater financial savings and risk protection, it also really helps to enhance business reputation as well. little bit about the finances there, but also let's remind ourselves of our customers' expectations, because ultimately we're selling a product or a service to people. So customers are so much more aware now of their social conscience. They're so much more engaged in human rights and ethical human practices. They're much more kind of divided on living costs now. So a lot of people are being much more considered now when they're thinking about where to spend their money. So we need to have a point of difference, and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is a really great way to have that difference. Now, there's some more things on the screen there, but just want to also add that when we can connect with our customers, we are able to innovate a lot better, which I'll talk about in a sec. But also, we've got that idea that a team with a member who shares a client's ethnicity is 152% likelier than any other team member to understand that customer. So that's huge. So actually bringing diversity into the organization means we're much more likely to also bring different ideas and different connections to our customers. Innovation also improves. So we've got some great stats there. So obviously greater problem solving and innovation. You've also got the 20% higher rate of innovation. Now that's fantastic, but also what comes from that is 19% innovation revenues. So there's some loads and loads and loads of data around this. So you can definitely tap into that, and it's all really credible sources as well. So you know you're getting really good stuff. We've also looked at the idea of reducing business risks, which of course is a massive financial gain or saving, if you like, for the organization. And we can't talk about this without, of course, talking about people, because that's the whole point of what we're doing. Now, we've got 5 generations working together, which just blows everyone's minds. It's never happened before. We've got lots and lots of job seekers saying that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is a really important factor when considering taking a role. And we've got some aspects around millennials, but also Gen Z. So it says there's 71% of millennials feel like opportunities are not equal for all. And actually you've got Gen Z, which are your kind of early entry, kind of middle management people now, are skeptical about companies' true commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. So it needs to go a bit further than just a statement on the websites, because you're just not going to attract that talent. They're so much more conscious now. And then you've got Gen Alpha that's going to be coming into the working world in about 5 to 10 years. They're even more aware now of what it's like to work for a more inclusive organization. So they will take their talent elsewhere. We've also got the aspect of engaged teams. So we've got some really great stats around that, and we're going to share all of these in the pack that we send to you afterwards. But studies have found that while homogenous groups, so people that are very similar, may be susceptible to groupthink, diverse teams are much more likely to have diversity of thought, of course, and they're much more likely to have a variety of perspectives, create greater trust, and also there's a really great aspect to teamwork style within the leadership culture as well. Some really great stats from McKinsey on that particular one as well, which we'll share with you in the pack. We've also got the aspect, there's just so much here. We've also got the aspect that additionally, people in organizations really care about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So you've got some statistics there on your screen, but it's huge. There's lots of people that are either already involved, or they want to be involved, or they're going to be involved at some point with all of these types of aspects. So there's a lot of people that are big advocates in the organization, but it's not just those that are passionate in this space. Global CEOs also agree. So a recent study throughout lots of different industries and different parts of the world found that 85% of senior leaders and exec agree that better diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging means greater business performance. So that's the internal benefit for the organization, for the profit margins, for the customers, for the employees. And there's tons of other stats and data and research out there. But let's take a look at the social impact of focusing on this work. So we've talked very much about the internal impact, but also there's a really important aspect for the external. So corporate social responsibility, which is your CSR there, refers to practices and policies that are undertaken and have the intention to have a positive influence in the world. Now, this is really important from a reputation point of view. It's important from a moral standpoint, let's not forget that one, but also it's really important for your current and future talent to feel like there's more purpose to the organization than just making money. So ESG is a little bit of a mix of that as well. So that's your environment, social and governance. And that's basically the idea of not just box ticking anymore. This is about building sustainable businesses and organizations that really make a positive influence in the world. So that's a lot of stats. I imagine you probably wouldn't have taken all of them down, but what I'll do, like I said, this is going to be in the pack that comes to you. Of course, you can rewatch this video back once we send it to you as well. But you've got a bit of a deeper knowledge and understanding of what the kind of business case around it even means. So you're armed with those business benefits, you've got some credible data, you've got some research to back you up, which is brilliant. That's the language that your exec and your senior leaders are going to be talking. Now we need to make sure that we've got some ideas around how to begin the conversation, because it can feel a little bit overwhelming. So I've got a few tips for you here. Number one is do your research internally as well as externally. So all of that data I just gave you, brilliant, but actually you need to get to thinking about, you know, what is your general population like? Do you even know where your starting point is, which is one of your next ones as well. But you also need to create an elevator pitch. So of course, we're not Dragon's Den or anything like that, but it really helps you to be able to define what this means to your organization. It also helps you to align it to the business values and the strategic objectives. That really kind of puts it up on an extra level as well. And it basically gives you the way to move forward and to, like I say, speak in the language of your senior leaders as well. So succinctly stating your case is a really great way for you to come across as credible, and also for you to be able to get them to think about it in a slightly different way. So understanding your start point, which I just said a moment ago, is really, really important. So utilizing internal and external data points is really helpful, but that alone is not going to give you and your senior stakeholders, who are your decision makers, aka the people that give you resource and budget for work, it's not going to give them enough to understand the benefits of moving forward. So setting up a couple of really informal focus groups facilitated by a learning professional, whether it's internal or external, will really allow for that kind of additional and personalized qualitative data that packs a bit of a punch. So especially when you can create safe spaces for people to completely be themselves and talk about what it means to them and how they feel about it, just adds an extra layer to your data. Using case studies is another really great way to kind of really pack a punch in there, and it gives your data the sort of evidence that it is possible. And in these settings, there's often a counter argument for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work that it's just not going to work in our organizations. Yep, we see it working somewhere else, but there's just no way it's going to work for us. If you can get case studies that align to your industry, or you can get case studies from other organizations that are similar to yours, you can kind of go, well, actually, it does work and it has worked, and look at the benefits that this organization has had. It just really adds an extra layer to that. Also, find an ally. So this is a really great one. So finding an ally in the senior leadership team is brilliant. If you can find more than one, fantastic. But what that does is you can approach them beforehand for advice. They'll also back you up during the conversation, which is really helpful. But it can also be helpful to practice on them a little bit, as they're probably going to ask you some of the same sort of questions that other people are going to be thinking, which means you can be armed with responses and solutions before you even go into that space. Remember, when you're talking to your exec and people like that, and your decision makers about this, it's all about credibility. So find an ally in your senior leadership team that will really help. But also, if you can find allies in other organizations where they've already had this conversation, you can actually ask them for advice as well, because you can learn from the mistakes they made, but also know how it worked well and what you can really push forward on your agenda. And number 6 is all about giving examples of some quick wins that can be done with no or minimal budgeting. So we're going to share some of these with you when we share the pack, because it's a really helpful way to get them to start to slowly come on board. And finally, before we move on to our key strategic questions, when you do get in front of your senior stakeholders, then set the tone, create a safe space, remind them that this is an open dialogue, and that this is sometimes the first time they would have talked about these things. So be patient, have empathy, and really listen to what it is that they're saying. So naturally then that leads us on to our key strategic questions. Now, really thinking about sparking engagement with your most senior people is really essential in this. You want them to be bought in, you want them to almost feel your energy in these conversations, because they need to start to understand this in a deeper level. So I've got some key strategic questions on the screen here. And again, we'll pop these into the pack for you so you've got something to take away from today. But there's some questions around not investing. So sometimes when you flip the question, it's really helpful. So how could not investing in this work damage our profit margins? And it gives them something to really think about and to really start to have a conversation about. What about not having the ability to attract future talent? And then you can flip the question again and think about how important is innovation to us? And obviously everyone's going to say it's really important. So think about, well, what could be damaged if we don't focus on this work? And also, what are our strategic objectives that can be strengthened? So really aligning it to your strategy and to your business objectives is a really, really important way to kind of speak the language of those people. Now, if you've been given time to do some exploring, then hit them with a couple of these questions in that time, get them to think together. But the chances are you'll have a 10-minute slot and probably an already rammed agenda. So give them these as a kind of parting gift and ask them to reflect on them before you meet again. If they're finding those questions a little bit too difficult, because sometimes this might be the first time they've ever had to think about these things, then there's some questions that you can ask just to slowly ease them in. Of course, bring the other questions in later, but this might be just a really nice way to start the conversation. Just keep it a little bit more loose. The idea here is we want to get your senior people to start to align their thinking around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work. And we want them to align that to the business strategy. That's where you're going to get your biggest bang for your buck when it comes to engagement, but of course, when it comes to the impact that you're going to have once you actually start your inclusion work, because you're going to have full buy-in of these people. So that's pretty much it. That was a lot of information, I appreciate, but integrating this type of work into your existing strategy, it takes reflection, it takes curiosity, it takes commitment and transparency, but more importantly, it takes time. So please, please don't try to boil the ocean. Just start somewhere. Small steps lead to big changes eventually. And this work can feel really overwhelming, especially if you're the person leading it and you're the only person in the organization. But of course, the same goes for your senior stakeholders, especially when you're dealing with senior people who are maybe in the majority and that they've never experienced certain systematic hardships before. That also means that you really need to approach this group with empathy and an urge to understand their priorities and also their reasonings behind why this has not yet been aligned or built into the strategy. So ease them in, get them on board and completely bought in. And I promise it will give your diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging efforts a much higher probability of succeeding in the long run. Finally, please, please don't be disheartened if the first conversation around this doesn't result in immediate release of budget or resource. Listen to what they say, go back to the drawing board and start again with a stronger business case for investing in this type of work. So that's it. Thank you so much for coming. I've taken up exactly 30 minutes of your time. Hopefully you've been able to take some helpful tips and ideas away, and I will share the thing with you afterwards. Please do share this as well with other people that you work with. And thanks for coming, taking this time to be with me. If you want to get in touch, please get in touch at the email there. If not, I'll send over the packs and I'll speak to you soon. Thanks, everybody.